200 years after the Buddha's death, and they speculate on the various pragmatic reasons why the Buddha image was probably adopted as a counter to the growing influence of Hinduism, or some such other logical explanation. The problem with this is that, again, you've a priori, you've already assumed that there is no such thing as sainthood, there is no such thing as genuine religion, there is no such thing as sacredly revealed art. It was the sages of the time who decided that the Buddha image could now be used. Just as it was Muslim Sufis who decided 100 years ago that now we can use images. Because they could foresee the profusion of images that were going to come in through the digital age. You know? That's what I believe anyway. So the Buddha image is actually made according to a particular canon. All over the Buddhist world, it's made according to this canon. Whether it's Theravada Buddhism, or it's Mahayana Buddhism, or it's Chan Buddhism, or known as Zen. Chan is actually a corruption of Dhyan. Chan became Zazen, and that became Zen. So this is the canon. And all of the numbers of proportions have a special significance to the story of the Buddha and to the message of Buddhism. Even if the image appears later, this is a key issue with all sacred art. Even if the image appears later than the historical date of the religion, that does not mean it is alien to that sacred tradition, to that revelation. Is the Buddha image giving us an alien message? No, it's not. How does he sit? He sits with his eyes lowered. What does that mean? It means the same thing it meant in the time of the Buddha. That desire comes in through the eyes. The path to salvation is to eliminate your desires. So you must lower your gaze, you must lower your eyes to the world. That image is that message is quintessentially Buddhist. You cannot say it's a latter thing. The Buddha image also does not take the same role as the Hindu image did. It retained its own particular role for the Buddhists. So similarly, if you look at the Red Indians, or any ancient people, you look at the Dakotas, or you look at the South American Indians of the Amazon, or you look at the Africans of the Sahara Desert, you'll always find that the sacred space is marked out. There's always a concept of one place being specially sacred. And this is a very interesting reciprocal concept. On one hand, the sacred encompasses the world. Wallahu ala kulli shay'in muhit. On the other hand, man mirrors this by creating a sacred space where the spirit may dwell. Even we Muslims say Baitullah, although God is everywhere, right? So all of these so-called primitive peoples, they always mark out their sacred space, and the first thing they do is when you put the peg in and you mark out your space, is you figure out east, the path of the sun. And the doorway is always facing east. And the women's section is always on the other side of the doorway. The yin and the yang, the white, the light and the dark. The outside world and the inner world. The womb of the house, the interior of the house. In every culture you will find this thing. This is a really remarkable phenomenon. And this is the way they organized their living space, the so-called primitive people. It was deeply symbolic. Every single part of the house. And what activity was to be carried out in which part of the house. Which part would the altar take? Which part would the guest be given? And they're remarkably similar in the manner of symbolism also. So this is not something which is unique to one or two civilizations. The strange fact is, again, to revert to something we said earlier, the very strange fact is that most people all over the world have trusted the sacred, have entrusted themselves to some sort of sacred revelation, and have said, no, this is not real. There is a higher order of reality which is not accessible to us, but which is accessible to this great man or these sages. And if we follow their message, we too can access it. We too can reach that world. So this idea is very, very, in fact it is the dominant idea. It's, apart from the Greeks and the modern West, we find no culture which rejects this idea. It's only the Greeks and then the modern West which says, no, we will use our logic. And, well, I don't see any angels, so they cannot exist. As Courbet famously.
I think even the Greeks were sophists, right?
Yeah, even with the Greeks, there are groups like they are the Neoplatonics who are actually who are mystical. Yeah. Even with the Greeks, there's other groups. But I'm saying even with the Greeks, you can say it never dominated. You can make that case. You can make that argument. Perhaps some expert in Greek history will decide that issue. But with the modern West, it has come to dominate, and not just the West, it has come to dominate the East also. So I think at this point we should take a break, because there's a lot more material in which you can document particular symbolisms and how the artist felt, what the artist felt they were achieving. But I think the key themes hopefully we have introduced. The idea of impersonal service, the artist being an impersonal servant of some sacred tradition, the lack of individualism, the desire to glorify that particular tradition, the aesthetic itself, the whole worldview being derived from that. I think these are the key points. And the key points I was trying to make about our education was, we cannot see it like this. We are analysts, we are modernists. We see line, color, shape, texture. But if you see a particularly thick brush stroke, is it line or is it color or is it shape or texture? It's all of those things, isn't it? When you see the Chinese doing their Tai Chi in the morning, is it a dance? Is it a martial art? Is it aesthetic? Is it religion? Is it spiritual? Is it philosophical? It's actually all of those things, isn't it? It is us modern men who have separated all of these into compartments. Apart from desacralization, the other aspect of modernity is we become compartmentalized. Everything is in little boxes. This is religion, and this is because of logic. Logic works like this. Right? That's the way the logical method works. So this is a huge stumbling block, I believe, to a true understanding of traditional art. I think that is what we're trying to convey. So at this point I think I will stop, and unless there's any particular area, so we'll take questions, I believe, or shall I continue with symbolism? Acha, Bismillah.
There's a question here about why the horizontal approach and the vertical approach have to be seen as mutually exclusive, and why can they not be treated together in conversation?
Well, some things have to be mutually exclusive. I think the wisdom requires us to see with both eyes. If we're looking at only similarities or only differences, we cannot achieve true wisdom. So yes, there is sometimes an overlap, and sometimes we can learn from, but I think at times we have to contrast the vertical with the horizontal, or we cannot approach at a clear picture of reality. That would be my opinion. For instance, let me give you a specific example to root this in, that might seem very vague and philosophical. For instance, the dome in Islamic architecture appears 100 years after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his own lifetime had spoken of domes, and he said this is a design which was inspired by heaven, because he went to Damascus as a trader, right, in his youth. And on his night journey, he speaks of the vault of heaven, of God's throne, Arsh, being a magnificent dome, a white dome, a shining white dome, which is held up by the 8 angels. So another thing which you have to realize is, this is a modernist bias, isn't it? If you're looking at physical time, this concept of sacred time is something very difficult, very different. Yeah, no, it's non-linear. Actually, time begins when that event begins. So there's this concept of sacred time. You have it with the Aborigines, with dream time, and so in sacred time, beginning and after, these things are not so important. Okay, 100 years, 200 years, 10 years, it doesn't matter. The real thing which matters is something else.
It's like saying that the time remains the same, just the calendar
Okay, yeah, that's one way of putting it. सही. हाँ जी, और कोई सवाल कर सकते हैं आप? उर्दू सवाल तो उर्दू में भी कर सकते हैं. सवाल चलो.
कि आप जैसे कह रहे हैं कि वो एक वर्ल्ड व्यू है जो बहुत ही कार्टेशियन डुअलिटी जिसको कहते हैं उसका वो है. आई एम जस्ट सरप्राइज दैट यू नो टिपिकली द साइंटिफिक सॉर्ट ऑफ ऑर्डर ऑफ द डे सॉर्ट ऑफ इन्फ्लुएंसेस थॉट बट you know chaos theory, quantum physics has been around for a while and again it sort of takes you back to a more perennialist sort of world view and I'm just surprised that's caught on.
Yeah. Why hasn't quantum physics caught on in the way that evolutionary theories have? Like evolution is a great overarching theory which is used in everything. The evolution of architecture from caves to skyscrapers. It's evolution of political society from kingship to democracy. I mean, this should be a greatly contested idea, but it isn't. So I think what happens is that someone brings a context. Quantum physics appears and it appears in the West and they interpret it according to their context. But there are certain other people, if you are aware of Amit Goswami, who is a Hindu quantum physicist and he's also a Vedantist, which is the old Indian monotheist tradition, mystical tradition. So he interprets quantum physics in a very Vedantic light. So there are differences. But I think primarily because of the society, they bring their own construct, their own spectacles to it, they fit it into their own context. So it's used more in the sense of relativism and skepticism rather than into the sense of mysticism. Even with communism is not necessarily any less materialistic. So yeah. जी. This is a very useful text which I have distributed. This shows you how the traditional potters, इसके फारसी भी versions होते थे जो कूजा नामे कहलाते थे. तो सारी जो मशरकी मुस्लिम दुनिया दो हिस्सों में बटी हुई थी, एक फारसी बोलने वाली और एक अरबी बोलने वाली. ठीक है. Hate to disappoint the GA Sindh and the pro-Balochistan freedom movement, but even the old books in Sindh were written in Farsi, and the old books in Balochistan were written in Farsi, and Bulle Shah wrote his only prose work in Farsi also. So Farsi was the language, the intellectual language, the language of intellectual discourse all over this part of the Muslim world, and Arabic was west of Baghdad, it was Arabic. So these were the two great Islamic languages. तो फारसी की सारी दुनिया में इसके नमूने गालिबन थे. Of these books which sometimes these were the only books the craftsmen had apart from the Quran. And these were books which showed you the symbolism of your craft, and they told you कि कौन सा वजीफा पढ़ना है, कौन सा मंत्र पढ़ना है, जब तुम मिट्टी गूंद रहे हो तो ये पढ़ो, जब तुम पेंट कर रहे हो तो गौ सिबगतुल्लाह फमन आसब, ये विर्द इस वक्त करना है. So it was a deeply sacred, everything was sacred, like we said. It was all connected. There wasn't this junk like we have today. Now it's Friday 1 o'clock, or now it's Sunday, now I go to church. You know what's that famous blues song, क्या है वो? They call it Stormy Monday, and Tuesday is just as bad, Wednesday is worse, and Thursday is also sad. The eagle flies on Friday, and Saturday I go out to play, Sunday I go to church and fall on my knees and pray. So you know, the drudgery of work, that's one mode of being, and then there's party, you know, and that's another mode of being, and then there's religion, and there's another mode of being. So it wasn't like that for traditional man. It was all one. I would say it's not all been lost.
About 10 years ago, when I first read this book, it was Smithsonian Institute and Nihilist.
जी 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 जी.
So I was working with some potters और मैंने उनसे पूछा कि अगर उनके पास ये किताब है